Vegetarian to Omnivore. Before opening this chapter, I would like to welcome all vegetarians and vegans and thank them for raising awareness on the environment, for the betterment of living conditions for animals, for raising awareness about the need for more vegetables in general, for some key innovations in food preparation, and parts of the permaculture movement, to name but a few of their contributions. I like to imagine that we all come to this table of life with something to offer. I learned so much about food being a vegetarian, how to cook better, how to get the right foods, and how to find solutions without overly depending on the animal kingdom, how to bring healthy, vibrant salads into my daily life. Thank you for this experience. I also see how the vegans and raw foodists have contributed to my understanding of the world. I learned to pre-soak nuts and grains, as did the indigenous tribes, how to better incorporate fermented foods, and the delicious taste of sunflower seed sprouts. I also learned the value of raw foods, how to incorporate greens and bitters into my repertoire, and the incredible healing powers of the coconut. By reading labels, I became more conscious of ingredients, processes of industrialization, heating techniques, refinement, and trade secrets. I see all of those who cross my path as friends, each on his own chosen path to find what works best for him or her. Even if we disagree on many subjects, I respect their autonomy and liberty to choose and express their ideas. You have to find your own way. It is your choice. I once met a vegan woman in Brittany who told me that she was vegan but ate tons of oysters as this was in her tradition. Perfect. She found her own path. She is on the way to her own destination. Toss out the rules and dietary strictures from the left or the right. Don't be afraid to be original. Find what works for you, to each his own, and try not to become psycho-rigid in your ideas. Do not be afraid to admit errors. Do not be afraid to let your old ideas die if need be. I had to throw out whole bookshelves of influences to finally find my own path, even if I can still appreciate what I learned along the way. The mind works best when it is open. Now for my own story. I was vegetarian for 7 years, or almost, since I ate fish occasionally. At the end of my voyage into vegetarianism, I veered off into the raw food vegetarian movement, which consists of eating between 80 and 100% raw food. I also made a side trip into another fad centered around green smoothies, which added to my diet large amounts of blended green vegetables and fruits. I did not know at the time that sugars, vegetables, and even vegetable fats did not contain the array of fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K from animal foods that were needed for proper absorption, and my own internal reserves of these same vitamins were exhausted rapidly. A significant loss of structural healthy fat and an overall demineralization occurred. In the end, I realized that these experiences were dangerous mistakes. I was tired, I had cavities, I was losing my hair, I was often angry, and my libido was stuck at 0. But worst of all was that I was convinced that I was really on track, the only track, to great health. To be clear, I don't directly accuse my vegetarianism of all the cavities and hair loss. I believe that our cultural conditioning of the last generations derailed us from nutrient-dense foods like raw milk, raw butter, raw egg yolks, liver, marrow, fish eggs, etc. And unfortunately, this wisdom is essential, especially during the first 2 years up to 7 years of life. One cannot altogether avoid the consequences of missing out on these unique years of exponential growth. Swimming in total confusion, I began to read books that went in the opposite direction to the one I was on to determine if I was not going the wrong way. And then, eureka! I finally listened to the opposing point of view. I then realized that I had never really looked carefully at my ideas about vegetarianism. I had never looked at the dark side of this utopia, which to all appearances seems green and environmentally friendly, but upon closer view feeds into monocultured crops of cereals, soybeans, corn, and rapeseed in the place of meat, causing soil depletion, the reduction of the number of agricultural farmers, their know-how, and the mass reduction of cattle farmers and the green pastures that live in symbiosis with them. So when I came to that point, I saw that I had fallen into a trap, one that I chose, but nonetheless a philosophy that did not meet my physical needs. Quote, 75% of vegetarians return to being omnivores. Results of a study done by Time magazine in the United States in 2005. Today, I'm not a vegetarian, and all the food elitism has been removed from my mind. I believe that a diet high in raw foods is beneficial and can even prevent early-stage cancer, but it took me a while to understand that animal products are the key to healing from sickness. This was understood by the Native Americans. I'm calmer now, my teeth are stable, my hair has stopped falling out, and my libido is back as well. My energy in general is stable and is no longer demanding stimulants. I am myself again. I am grateful for the revelations and inspirations which were sent to me, and especially for the people who helped me understand my mistakes. Rudolph Steiner and Edgar Cayce recommended a diet largely lacto-ovo-vegetarian, but they also believed that if this diet was to serve our health, that it should remain open to fish, poultry, and lamb, although on occasion only. Both were absolutely against veganism, the philosophy of abstaining from products from the animal, such as eggs, cheese, meat, or even honey. Many vegans tend to reach for a paradisal state of bygone times, a past-oriented focus. Steiner and Cayce considered veganism as a rejection of this earthly life and thus a blindness to our actual physical needs. To be clear, Steiner did not advocate the vegetarian diet for the mass population of the world, but he was addressing members and adepts of the Anthroposophical Society that were on a spiritual, individual, and personal path. So how have I been able to reconcile my personal omnivorous experiences with the largely vegetarian advice from Steiner and Cayce? Steiner implied that no one can access vegetarianism without signals from the body. The body signal is primary. I find that very revealing because it would mean that stopping meat consumption would correspond to a signal coming from the body as a physical aversion. For me, without this release, caused by the final integration and deep understanding of our dependence and mutual symbiosis with the animals, we cannot lessen this dependence. Traditional cultures knew this and gave their respect to the animal and offered them a sacred place in their lives. I did not understand anything about animals before. I never contemplated their saving role in man's history. I wanted, in my immaturity, all the animals on earth to live forever. But was it not I, myself, and my fixed ideas, who was afraid of death and its inevitable cycle? The animals still had a great lesson to teach me. At the time, I thought I was better than the omnivores around me, while in the mind I had a raging carnivorous spirit. The ego loves to exalt itself as superior to others. Quote, "It's not what one puts in one's mouth that determines one's character, but rather what comes out." It is true that how one eats has an influence on the body-spirit connection, but it's not as black and white as we think, because this influence is dependent on our environment, our emotional state, our physical needs, our culture, and our genetic heritage. I understand those who say that vegetarianism may be the bearer of a spiritual impulse. In some ways, animal overdependence and even healthy animal fats can make the body too lazy to fulfill certain needs from within itself. Tolerant vegetarians often have an awareness of the importance of eating well and a respect for the planet in general. I also believe that in some cases, a vegetarian diet is very beneficial to the body for a given period. Even a low-fat diet can have its place at some moment along the ever-changing path, if just to allow the body to create its own fats for a while and to discover latent resources. As for today's inner spiritual work or specific spiritual paths by those who have fully understood the mysteries of nutrition, food is of less central importance than it was in the times of monastic asceticism. The body played a greater role before, and asceticism and fasting leads to a more body-based spirituality. Today the spirit has deeper penetration. Overmore, these cases of deep inner work are a tiny percentage of the population. So I am careful not to place at the center of the masses these body adaptation needs of the few, albeit in growing numbers. But I do not believe that food can make us spiritual by default. When we observe life, it is much more subtle than that. The Dalai Lama and Tibetan Lamas in general, for example, live non-violently and eat pork to satisfy their physical needs. Native Americans who lived in a spiritual life dedicated to serving others also needed animals to feed their tribes. By their vitality and their harmony with nature, they show us a spirituality that has lasting results, not an intellectual spirituality. As Rudolph Steiner said, spirituality is very practical. Even if one is vegetarian, one should be well informed on man's historical interdependence on the animal kingdom. A responsible parent having the knowledge of where to find a rich array of vitamins in his or her environment in times of difficulty is part of traditional common wisdom. Is our dependence on them understood? Steiner implied that the vegetarian impulse must come from the body, not from tendency or mass conditioning. Who knows? Perhaps the body, once completely detoxified, can become less dependent on the animal kingdom. There is still a mystery around this question, but I have decided to keep an open mind. If one makes this choice by collective trend, by reading articles through a spouse, or if it is an ideological choice at all, this could be a big mistake for the body. This was my personal experience. An anecdote from the life of Rudolph Steiner. After giving a conference on vegetarianism in a small village in Germany in the early 20th century, Rudolph Steiner and his anthroposophical colleagues decided to have lunch downtown. All his colleagues ordered vegetarian dishes a la carte, because at that time it was not easy to find a restaurant without meat as the primary ingredient. The chef was running all over the place to meet the demands of this curious table of friends. When the waiter asked Steiner what he would like to eat, he responded, "The house special, please." The house special was meat, of course. As the group was leaving, the owner of the restaurant said, "That man was the only normal person in the group," referring to Steiner. Steiner ordered and ate the meat dish to teach by example, in part because even if he endorsed a lacto-ovo-vegetarian diet for his spiritual meditations and teachings, he also advised that we should not be rigid or closed-minded and that tendencies and peer pressures should not influence our decisions. Listening to the inner voice is essential. Where one sees rigidity, do the opposite. Be flexible. He also stated elsewhere that vegetarianism would not work for everybody and could be an error if undertaken lightly. This shows that Steiner was a man capable of teaching others with spontaneity, flexibility, and a big dose of humanity. Of all the cultures studied by Weston Price, the cultures that ate the most animal products, especially from the sea, were the most robust and the least sick. When we talk about vegetarianism, we often think of India. However, the Hindus of southern India, who are vegetarians, have a lower life expectancy than the rest of the world. The relationship between the economy and the overpopulation plays an important role in the prevalence of vegetarianism in India. Gandhi, one of my childhood heroes, was a vegetarian by choice, but he had lost half of his teeth by the age of 60 and had many physical problems. Some people will bring up healing forces of vitality when they convert to a vegetarian diet, as plants are like medicine in that they promote circulation through their active principles. This generally only lasts for a certain period, and after this period of months or years, they often will not detect that there are growing deficiencies under the surface because they have let the mental philosophy take the controls at this point, and they have lost connection with the body's deeper needs. Some, by their constitution, may even be able to go for 20 plus years without animal products. But be careful, because if you are trying to convert others to your way of living, they may not have the capacity that you have, and it may be dangerous for them. Most people resist being proselytized to by religious leaders, but when food becomes a religion with conversion and the carnivore sinners, we are doing the same thing. Vegetarianism has no real historical proof in any ancient civilization. It is still largely a myth. But of course, the future and current trends have their own origins, so I try to keep an open mind despite my own experience. What about the generations to come? The work of Dr. Francis Pottinger, MD, on diet and successive generations reveals that many of the pathological effects attributed to a low nutrient profile diet of the first generation of cats may not openly manifest themselves in the second generation, but have a tendency to show up in full force in the third generation. The offspring of their offspring, the grandchildren, Our choices go far into the future generations. Some claim that children today are born vegetarian, but how can one be sure that a child hates meat because he can't digest it properly due to an enzymatic deficiency, or because he or she was influenced by societal trends and recurrent themes found in the incoming shows and films that the child is identifying with? A well-placed cartoon that suggests these marginal ideas, a sensational video of poorly treated animals, or a child friend who has been externally influenced his or herself can seriously affect a child. If it is innate, how can we be sure that it's not a consequence of this last sugar century on the child's physiology? How can we be sure that this child will not devolve into infertility and sterility, a growing reality of modern times? How can we be sure if it is not part of natural selection which renders infertile those with hereditary deficiencies, such as the lack of enzymes to digest meat, for example, so that they are not transmitted to later generations? The child who cannot tolerate meat may be going through a phase, learning to say no, or in a more extreme case, may be a symbol of the degeneration of the species. He or she may have serious fertility problems in the future, or if not him or herself, then his or her children. This would confirm Weston Price's perspective that a cavity-ridden society is in great danger of extinction if it does not turn the tide. It could very well be a child born vegetarian as well. I leave this question open, but I am not afraid to expose the possible dangers. Being an optimist, I feel this child could heal through a nutrient-rich diet, most essentially for the first few years of his life. These early years are irreplaceable. It is a myth that raising cattle for meat is less environmentally friendly than grain crops. From the WAPF website, quote, vegetarians point out that grazing cows and sheep need land, which could be put to better use by the production of cereals to feed the millions of people dying of starvation in third world countries. This argument ignores the fact that a large proportion of the Earth's surface is not suitable for cultivation. The vast spaces of the steppe, deserts, and mountains produce fruit in the form of grazing animals. On desert lands, well-managed grazing know-how can actually improve soil quality and restore the prairie. End quote. However, the monoculturing of cereals and pulses is a far greater threat to the future of humanity since it tends to impoverish the soil. She continues, quote, it is not the livestock that is causing hunger and famine, but the practices of misguided agriculture and systems of monopolistic distribution. End quote. I'd love to see vegans eating all that clover, coarse alfalfa, not sprouts, horse nettles, bull nettles, and coarse stems of prairie vegetation that would otherwise go to waste. And what about listening to nature? In Texas, there was an overpopulation of deer which were destroying the local forest due to their habit of overeating tree bark. There was a rapid infestation of deer ticks, and to remedy the situation, many hunters were hired. There was actually a shortage of hunters and an overabundance of environmental laws which hindered this needed cleanup. The hunt provided a great supply of vitamin-rich venison meat for the locals. Vegans often overlook these examples of natural selection and natural population control. Even the bee populations have weakened over time. Beekeepers employ every artificial means to keep hives going when certain weaker hives should be allowed to die off or even be destroyed and certain artificial practices abandoned. Aggressive strains of bees from Russia are now being used to re-strengthen our bee colonies. Extroversion pushed to its extreme creates aggression, but curiously, a certain amount of this quality found in the Russian bees is needed to strengthen the bees. Nature is not all unicorns and rainbows. Geese kill their own offspring if they detect anomalies in their behavior. We find this to be cruel, but it keeps their gene pool from wearing out over millennia. We must let go of infantile ideas about the animal kingdom, and the human kingdom as well. Low birth rates in Europe have come from the overall weakening of the family unit, which is caused by the state taking on the roles of the family, education, health, financial aid, etc. In Denmark, the so-called paradise of socialism, birth rates are strikingly low since this system came online. As they say, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Or my own version of this expression, no pressure, no diamonds. When there is state-run, high tax, tax the young to pay for the old, reversal of tradition, which generates cradle-to-grave assistance and structural resentment towards the father principle, the family and community loses its strength. The family overdelegates its own autonomy on education and health care, and this results in heavy, freedom-killing social charges to pay for this weakening. Maybe this was part of the plan, to create dependence under the guise of fraternity, or in the worst case, to build up and maintain a pile of errors that nature would have let fail, enabling toxic overgrowth in the place of natural selection. Many of our ideas need to be reinvestigated, and we must be able to see these community-killing parasitical structures for what they are, and the non-governmental free association models that they hinder. These observations are not fully off-topic, as a correction of how we see our relationship to nature and society is at the root of this dysfunction. If we stop practicing avoidance and face challenges, we will become more resilient. One clear observation of this reality begins the process towards healing. One of the biggest arguments that I hear is that all the soy and canola production goes into feeding the animals for their meat or their milk, so strict vegetarianism would be the solution to this problem. This is not even true. It may be true for China, but in France the cattle are only allowed 5% of soy pulp meal or canola pulp meal, which unfortunately is enough to negatively alter the hormonal system, inducing weight gain. 80% is forage, of which 60% is fresh or dried grass. The pulp meal could be replaced by grain mash and pulp of local cultures or beet pulp. The USA uses much more soy meal or soy oil as a hormone than France, so the adaptation would be more of a challenge, but entirely feasible. Side note on meat and grass-fed labeling. Grass-fed labeling in the USA only ensures that they were put to pasture at some point, typically at the beginning of the life cycle only. 100% grass-fed is better, but they may only be talking about the raising phase of the cow, as in pasture-raised. And nothing guarantees that they are actually on green grass, as grass labeling is not limited to actual grass, but dried forage and fermented silage. This can render the milk or meats more acidic. These cattle are usually grain-finished. And even if it is non-GMO grain, it usually contains corn and soy, which are bought as a supplement mixture. These supplements, even if only used marginally, have been caught with glyphosate residues even on so-called organic samples. Even grass-finished labeling cannot guarantee that no rapeseed or canola pulp or vegetable oil fats were used as an endocrine-enhancing supplement. This could explain the controlled marbling effect produced in some grass-fed meats. This all points to how well the prison has been built. The locavore, local foods movement can be used by the industrial meat industry as a way of keeping out imported foods which would reveal by their taste a stark difference in quality. To quote Bob Marley, "Don't let 'em fool ya." To be fair, things are changing, and there is finally multi-million-dollar contracts being finalized for the importation of Irish true grass-fed meats (Cisco, Boston, and New York regions). This may also be just a way to control the grass-fed desires of the populace with price gouging, but I am optimistic to such potential. One can understand the fears American meat operations have, as the Irish meat has a better vitamin and taste profile. Dry-aged meats are only better because they help to further break down the endocrine-triggering soy and canola proteins now sadly found in all USDA meat. Concerning the blood, I have observed a red active principle and a white passive principle in the body. When properly combined through alternation, not forgetting the green principle of leafy vegetables, of course, our stools become healthy. The red blood cells in the right meat, uncontaminated by fat marbling, brings a rosy hue to the complexion and gives testosterone-like strength for orthosympathetic action. The white principle, like tryptophan, serotonin-rich, soy-free, chicken, turkey, fresh, not frozen shrimp, ceviche, ricotta-style cheeses from Russian soils, or curds made from local raw milk, contribute to the parasympathetic, passive, and recovery needs of the body, white blood cells. Note: fresh local raw shrimp ceviche is high in tryptophan, cooked shrimp meat can be an alternative to chicken meat. As in Scandinavia, you will need to combine bacon with most seafood to bring the needed fat, with the exception of herring or other fatty fish like sardines and mackerel. Prefer salted whole fish herring found in Russian shops, which is more filling than the vinegar-based herring. As for the red meat, only hunters who do not overcook and consume at least some of their prey without freezing seem to be able to find this quality of meat in America today. More organ meats and tartare culinary sauce magic can be a lifesaver here for the rest of us. Red and white foods are the extremes which can help rebalance our gut. We also find foods which are in the middle, a pinkish orange. The Scandinavians, Jews, and the Russians in that order have understood this central vitamin-rich middle color tone. Lox salmon and unsweetened whipped cream, trout and salmon roe with cream, beets with cream sauce, borscht with creme fraiche, etc. These central foods create vitamin-rich combinations of fat and vitamins and help to heal our inner soil and organs. Weston Price stated that this orange hue was at the origin of vitamin synthesis. Animals sacrificed or children sacrificed. We create nutritional deficiencies by eliminating cholesterol-rich cows from our pastures. The brain is composed of almost 50% cholesterol. Children cannot produce cholesterol until around 7 years of age. We are not going to put animals in front of children, are we? As in saying no to animal cruelty but saying yes to child cruelty? One might need to take a look inside and heal their inner child instead of projecting this desire to protect this inner child onto animals. If the animal could speak, he'd probably tell you to stop using animals as an excuse to hate those who disagree with you and work on saving yourself and your fellows. We need to stop projecting a weak, broken image onto animals. In truth, they are strong and have much to teach us. Their contributions to our lives and even our physical brains and hearts throughout history reveals their great offering to us. And just to take it a step further, even if the animals are removed, then what replaces them? Soy again. For those who are concerned with the carbon footprint and the CO2 emissions from animal farming, first, don't let politicians or their child ambassadors dictate science to you. CO2 is considered a small factor in the total understanding of climate change. Water vapor and the changing temperature and angle of the sun are much more significant factors agreed upon by many Nobel Prize scientists. It is important to know that agriculture contributes to only 14% of CO2 emissions in the world after feeding all of humanity, according to the EPA. And half of this, which is to say 7%, concerns the raising of livestock. 7% CO2 to feed the world. Secondly, we must also consider the political motivations underlying this movement. Is it possible to prepare a world government progressively without sovereignty, financed by an eco-tax placed on all nations, which is disguised behind quote-unquote expert science, penalties and fines for those responsible for such emissions? Human action can definitely affect the weather, and I even believe that purposeful weather modification is being done since the 50s. Cloud seeding using airplanes, to pick one example, is a decades-old practice. This is not conspiracy. Most of the documents can be found on the UN website. But I don't buy into the CO2 part of the climate change argument. This is just an example of cherry-picking one factor out of 20 major factors that science has studied on climate change. And this one factor just happens to be the one that allows us to tax fuel and control a nation's production. Found the motivation? There has been a global greening effect of 15 to 30% in the last 100 years, despite all the cherry-picked media to the contrary, due to the fact that plants thrive on CO2. The more CO2 in the atmosphere, the less water plants need to survive. This reduces drought worldwide. I am open to many other less political explanations. Some even believe that we are helping the planet's flora by bringing up into the atmosphere the sequestered CO2 found deep in the earth through drilling. There are hundreds of Nobel scientists on both sides of this issue. In any case, if you want less CO2, the transformation of the wastelands, steppes, and prairies into pasture and livestock-based systems of composting and regeneration is a long-term solution. After all, is it not green grass which is one of the most significant factors in the reabsorption of CO2 on the planet? I am not speaking here of oversized industrial livestock farming using heavy soy and grains as feed, but livestock farms which have sustainable, grass-fed practices which are supported by informed citizens. Some guidelines. Follow your intuition without the ideology. Listen to your body. Remove the forbidden sign which hangs over any natural and traditional food, otherwise intuition will be blocked by belief systems. If you are diabetic, convalescent, pregnant, or if you have metabolic problems of assimilation or other pathologies, it is quite possible that your body is not able to absorb and extract nutrients in food efficiently. In this case, direct use of animal products is essential. We are interdependent on the animal kingdom. We must consume eggs and fermented dairy products or animal equivalents. Healing our dietary intolerance with eggs and milk is possible, and where it is not, other animal products may be used instead. Choose quality animal products from animals raised outdoors with access to pasture. Feel free to call and ask questions directly to the producer. Have gratitude and reverence for the animals and understand their role, their contribution to our health, and the great sacrifice of pure love that they offer to us and our generations to come. This is how we honor the animal. If your body is able to lessen some of its dependence on animals, and this change comes from a purely physical sensation or aversion and not a trend or collective conditioning, trust your body. Daily minimum requirements for vegetarians from clinical trials. I include here a list of minimum daily needs for vegetarians to avoid deficiencies. This list, one among many others, was drawn from clinical trials on 3,000 patients and has been adapted from the work of Dr. Diana Schwartzbein. It does not include foods from the soy industry. Protein, 2 eggs, 14 grams of protein. 60 grams of raw cheese, like whole-filled imported Gruyere, 20 grams of protein. 1 big cup of cottage cheese curds, made from whole milk products or imported farmer's cheese from eastern soils or small Amish farms. See Creamy Curds recipe. 30 grams of protein. 30 grams of almonds or Marcona almonds, all nuts saltwater soaked and dried if possible, or make ajo blanco. 7 grams of protein. 30 grams of walnuts, pecans, macadamia, Brazil nuts. 7 grams of protein. Add to this list the traditional guidelines for vegetarians and omnivores. Fat. Minimum 2+ tablespoons of yellow imported butter raw on occasion. Minimum 1 to 2 tablespoons unfiltered virgin olive oil. If needed, consume small amounts of varied traditional fats and oils such as flaxseed oil, walnut, wheat germs, sesame, etc. Vegetables, raw, cooked, or fermented, 1/3 of each, as you like. Less fermented foods are needed as the gut finds its balance. Carbohydrates, 1 to 2 small handfuls per meal as required for physical activity, roughly 55 to 90 grams of carbs per meal. To lose weight, 25 to 55 grams per meal. Beverages, prefer lacto-fermented beverages or broth. Drink spring water in glass bottles from historic sources. Avoid drinking water for up to 2 hours after eating meals. If you are in an acidic state, learn to make enhanced water with glyphosate-free oats, which are found online only. Non-GMO is not a safeguard against glyphosate, as it has slipped into organic foods for many years now. Grind the oats, pre-soak with spring water, a teaspoon of Celtic salt, and a hint of raw honey or dark maple syrup. Let sit overnight. This can supplement your calcium intake as well. Learn to make thick fermented beet juice for the blood and anemic conditions. Supplement foods, fermented cod liver oil, walkabout emu sipping oil, ski queen Norwegian brown cheese, soft coconut meat, homemade natto, Solaray B3 full flush therapy, primrose oil for women, Brazil nuts for selenium. This eating plan is rich in fat, calcium, and minerals. Many modern health experts believe that all animal products are acidifying, when in reality the short-chain saturated fats are pH neutral. The best protection against acidity is a diet rich in minerals and low in sugar. How to stay healthy and fit. The golden rule in maintaining your ideal weight, not according to fashion magazines, but not fully Greek statues either, but a modern balance of old and new, is to eat 3 meals a day without snacking. Breakfast will contain fats and proteins. Some people will have to make efforts to re-educate the body. It takes a little time, but your body will thank you in the end. In a recent study, it was shown that among two groups of volunteers that had the same meals, that Group A, who skipped breakfast, tended to gain weight, while Group B, who ate 3 meals a day, did not. When the body goes for long periods without eating, or when one eats too many empty calories, the body panics and starts to store in anticipation of a possible storage. The best way to not stock up is to give the body a steady diet of nutrient-dense foods and some exercise. However, experiment with your body and see what's best for you. I have seen positive results for people who have fasted for dinner for a few weeks to lose weight. Sometimes we must strengthen our willpower, if nothing else. Try to love your body and not over-focus on weight, but on health. The body has a fixed weight point based on the hormones it needs to produce. One of the reasons women gain weight during menopause is to bring on more natural estrogen stores in order to make up for the reduced quantity of hormones coming from the ovaries. All bodies follow this same logic. Sometimes the weight point is keeping you healthy while your body tries to detox old toxins. Sometimes you gain weight only to detox the same weight later on, like a cycle of detoxification. Sometimes water weight is gained to dilute toxins as well. Certain toxins may take a few years to detoxify. One can thwart this cycle if one is obsessed with weight and owns a scale. Much of the obesity epidemic is due to lack of proper nutrient-dense foods in the environment. It is a defense mechanism for the toxic load in the environment. The body stores certain toxins in the fat so that they can be released at a later time, when the system is not overloaded with toxins or deficient in nutrients. Tip: add 1 to 2 tablespoons of coconut oil to some warm water and an optional teaspoon of apple cider vinegar or lemon. Drink 15 minutes before each meal to eliminate snacking between meals, improve digestion, and keep your figure. For elimination, spring and summer. Buy 12 leeks a week to make a cooked leek puree. If needed, white wine helps to break down the sulfur in the leeks. Add to this 12 fennels a week to eat raw or sliced into a salad. Do for 1 to 3 weeks. Concerning fasting, I don't practice intensive fasting regimes. Intermittent fasting may be useful to stimulate the hormonal system in efforts to recalibrate insulin or leptin response. For light depressive states or for digestive rest and healing, the easiest way would be to eat nothing after 7 p.m. and then have a normal breakfast and lunch the next day. That will make 12 to 13 hours of fasting, which can be brought in as needed. Others may sleep better eating later. Each person does what works best for him or her. If you have diabetes or suffer from hypoglycemia in the family, I would not advise you to skip breakfast, but rather dinner, if you choose to fast intermittently. Try a broth fast. Use chicken, lamb, or beef carcass, feet, and bones, or fish heads and bones, and some vegetables, and fresh thyme. Cook for 24 hours at a low temperature. Cook 4 to 6 hours for fish-based broth. Strain and refrigerate or freeze. Consume only broth for 1 to 3 days. Or try a disassociated mono diet. With only soy-free eggs, made as you like, add 1 garden vegetable, some cooked, some raw, depending on the vegetable, for each meal during 3 days. Try a raw milk fast. For vegetarians and omnivores, drink raw milk or fermented cow's milk, not Holstein milk. goat or sheep's milk in place of your meals for 1 to 3 days. This milk cure was tested in hospitals for convalescents and those suffering from tuberculosis in former times. If you are sensitive to milk, you can allow it to ferment 1 to 2 days at room temperature, or you can warm the milk and add raw honey, vanilla, and cardamom to help digestion. If you have a slight allergy, then you can try the homemade creamy curds recipe in the chapter on milk, as this is the most digestible of them all. There is no comparison to store-bought milk products. One thing to remember: the body changes over time. What may work for a few seasons to get the results you want from your body, including your stamina and your desired shape, must often be changed to adapt to the body's changing needs. No one set of rules will work for all. Some of the ideas in this book no longer serve me today, but they are listed as part of the path to healing. Yet, all the ideas found here have value for different stations of recovery. I've seen fasting backfire because I tried to put looks over health, so now I try to accept my body and listen to where I can improve without destabilizing the body too much. The goal is not a body-focused life, but a life focused on the body, soul, and spirit. Full spectrum. I used to push everything, but now I try to relax into a more gentle transformation. Inner stillness is the redemption of movement after all. Another type of healing. Acceptance is the key.